Mike, Danie, good morning and good evening.
Good morning.
Morning.
Danie, you are in South Africa. Where specifically?
Down in the Western Cape, on the coast.
Nice. And it is evening there, so we appreciate appreciate you spending your time with us today. I'm not going to say anything else, Mike. I'm just going to turn it right over to you, and we can get started. Just note that this is going to be quite technical, given that we have our illustrious VP of Exploration joining us to talk about the resource. So, Mike, with that, I'll just hand it off to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Danie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Yes, this will be a bit more technical content. Pleased to show off some of what we've worked up here over winter as we come into our biggest programs yet planned for 2023. And of course, on the backs of that healthy resource increase 6 days ago. Without further ado, I'll just get right to a screen share and dive in. We are indeed Stillwater Critical Minerals, and we're bringing the next phase of critical mineral supply to the Stillwater District. This looks a lot like the Bushveld and the Platte Reef, and that is why we've brought Danie in along with Albie Brits to guide the expansion of our work here. That was a forward-looking statement, and we will be making other forward-looking statements. This is available on the website if you'd like to read it in detail. We are part of the Metallic group of companies, 3 public companies listed across the top of your screen there, and all share the same approach to business here. It's a collaboration of companies, no cross holdings between the companies, and we're not in the business of charging these companies fees in the way some groups do. In each case, these are district scale assets, bring some new thing. In the bear market, acquisition is an important part of our credo, and then build that out into an improving market, basically bringing new thinking and new techniques to districts. Everything is done with a view to take over by a major. Greg Johnson has done this before at NovaGold, and that's where our playbook comes from effectively. We are focused on the US and in critical minerals. We are a Canadian listed mineral exploration company. We're focused on critical minerals in the Stillwater District. Our vision is to become a primary US-based source of low-carbon battery and precious metals. We are well positioned to do this in the famously productive and metal-rich Stillwater District of Montana. We're advancing low-carbon critical mineral supply in the US. And we have this very good quote from the White House up top about the increase in minerals, the demand that is required as we make this transition to a greener age and electrification in general. We have a fantastic technical team and board. Dr. Danie Grobler here on the call with me, Vice President of Exploration since last May. He joined us from Ivanhoe, where he was advancing their 112 million ounce, 4 billion pound Platte Reef project. Albie Brits joined him as well as senior geologist, and I can't say how much fun it was to bring these two to Montana to related geology. Mike Austenson and Justin Woodrew are the key members of the team in Montana. Justin Woodrew is actually the vendor of the project, and he's what led us to Montana. These guys have multi-decades of experience in Stillwater. Danie and Albie bring multi-decades of experience in the Bushveld. Together, that's the dream team. Myself, I founded the company in 2007. I have a good depth of experience running juniors and also in environmental science and processing relating to mining. Greg Johnson is chair, again, that NovaGold playbook, and he's done this before. Gordon Toll is worth calling out, past deputy chair of Ivanhoe and builder of very large mines globally. Terrific team, well-versed in advancing a junior and de-risking a mining asset. The leadership team behind the scenes, good expertise in metallurgy, resource modeling, mining, and mine engineering. And this marvelous quote from Dave Broughton, who I believe Danie replaced at Ivanhoe, recognizing the Platte Reef parallels back in 2018. Our industry partners, we've been partnered with the USGS now for 6 years at Stillwater. They, of course, make the critical minerals lists for the US, and they've seen a rapid increase in the funding available to them just in the past year. And we're looking forward to expanding our work with them on that basis. We are expanding our work with UBC and the recently renamed ARCA group. This is Greg Dipple. This is carbon sequestration in ultramafic rocks. And we have this capacity at Stillwater, and we're looking to expand this and put some numbers around this as a way of going for low carbon or even zero carbon nickel mining. Very excited to announce just in the past few weeks our work with Cornell and their DOE grant under the ARPA-E program. This is not only carbon sequestration in a more active manner than the UBC work is doing, but also hydrometallurgical work with carbon dioxide derived methods. And that's quite exciting to us as the more progressive age of mining and mineral processing. And Goldspot. We've been working with Goldspot for some time and their AI methods for exploration. We are focused very much in Montana. I'm going to blast through this slide as many of you are familiar with it. We have 2 other district scale assets. All of these are adjacent to world-class mines and deposits, and we have 100% ownership on all of these projects. We've completed all earn-ins some time ago. Big databases, big potential. Again, focus on Stillwater to the point that we've now sold the Black Lake Dayton project, and Heritage Mining is doing good work there. We're very pleased to have exposure to the gold space through them. Stillwater very much the focus, as you'll see in subsequent slides here. We are after very high demand critical minerals. This is, of course, the buzzword now. Stillwater District was producing these since before they were critical. Nickel demand is increasing dramatically, driven by the EV industry and the need for clean nickel, ideally sourced from sulfide to meet that battery demand. PGEs, palladium, rhodium, primarily for catalytic converters, not going away anytime soon. And the demand, especially out of China and India, for cleaner exhaust will sustain that demand. Platinum is an interesting one, as it's the preferred catalyst for the production of green hydrogen and also the use of that green hydrogen in fuel cells. Copper, we have a lot of cobalt. We have significant cobalt, and we're not in the Congo. The demand for all these things is going up with EVs. We also have significant gold and chromium. The Stillwater District is known for chromium. We are not yet including it in our economics and in our equivalent studies. However, we've inventoried 2.3 billion pounds of chromium, and we're looking forward to bringing that on the table more as work goes forward. I've moved fairly quickly through these slides because we've done these in the past, and these are available on the deck for further review if you'd like. We're very glad to be in these critical commodities in the US at a time when the US is looking to secure them. The need for these commodities is being driven by a number of global factors that are coming together at once. Deglobalization, climate concerns, and electrification have all compounded at the same time to drive this need for domestic critical mineral supply. We're building factories in the US and in Europe now for cars, for chips. This is all about getting off of, well, particularly Chinese production. The shift to green energy is creating demand for these commodities as well. This is especially apparent in Europe as countries look for energy independence from Russia. And the electrification movement in general is driving a broad demand for these commodities. Silver for solar cells, copper for the grid, all this stuff. Environmental and humanitarian concerns are very real. Most platinum comes from South Africa, cobalt from the DRC, nickel from comparatively dirty sources in Indonesia. It's better to support to mine these things in North America, especially when it comes to nickel sulfide, cleaner than the nickel ores from Indonesia. The US is very strong now about national security concerns. China controls 80% of the global critical mineral supply, 68% for nickel, 73% for cobalt. Russia is the world's largest supplier of palladium and also nickel sulfide, distinct from the nickel laterites that come from New Caledonia, Indonesia. It is better to mine responsibly in the first world and to first world standards, and that is essentially the point here. And the US has now enacted the Inflation Reduction Act, unprecedented funding to secure domestic supplies of exactly these metals. Okay, the main point of this webinar is the updated resource estimate from literally 6 days ago, and Danie will do a deep dive in the geology behind it and what we see coming next. The base case is up a healthy 62%, remarkable increase given the modest size of the program that drove it. Again, we use the 0.2% nickel equivalent cutoff. It's about a 0.62 palladium equivalent cutoff. We could have gone lower than that given the current prices and the increases in nickel price especially. We did not want to do that. We're still up 62% to 255 million tons at a 0.39% nickel equivalent grade. That's over 1 billion pounds of nickel metal in the ground, 500 million pounds of copper, 2 million ounces palladium, and the other metals as you see, 1.6 billion pounds of battery metals, 3.8 million ounces PGEs and gold in a producing mining district in the US. This is a very compelling and growing asset. We did a, same as last time, we ran a 0.35% nickel equivalent cutoff, and this is looking at a higher underground mining grade, perhaps a block cave scenario or something. 120 million tons in that scenario, 0.51% nickel equivalent. That's 1.5 grams palladium equivalent. Robust metals, still over 1 billion pounds total battery metals, 2.3 million ounces precious and gold. And then we ran for the first time a high grade scenario, and this has really caught the industry's eye and the investors' eyes, and it speaks to where we're going in this project as we complete our own drill programs and prove up higher grades. We ran a 0.7% nickel equivalent cutoff for the first time. That's over 2 grams palladium equivalent. And we've still got nearly 12 million tons at that level, over 1% nickel equivalent grade, over 3 grams per ton palladium equivalent. These are very robust numbers, and it speaks to the optionality we have on possible mine methods here at Stillwater. A bunch of different scenarios work very nicely. Looking at the value split on that base case, we're 46% nickel by value with that 1 billion pounds. This is on a $9 nickel price, not the current sort of $13.50 nickel price. Next in line, palladium, nearly 20%, cobalt, 10%, copper, 9%, and on down through the others. So where does this place us in the US nickel supply chain? And even within North America, we're basically without peer at this point when you consider active mining districts, even expanding mining districts such as Stillwater, and then scale and grade, and actually really good looking sulfur numbers in the resources. The US currently consumes about 480 million pounds of nickel per year. It produces 40. The bulk of that is from Lundine's Eagle mine. This is the only producing mine in the US. Its total run of mine production, 440 million pounds. They've produced already 3/4 of that. And they're expected to close in a year or two here, about 2025. That'll be replaced by Talon Metals' Tamarack project, 49% owned by Rio Tinto, expected to start in 2026. And Tesla has already bought the entire projected supply of that mine at 165 million pounds per year. In total, they have just under 500 million pounds of nickel in all categories. It's interesting to note that in their inferred category, they've got a 0.83% nickel grade and a 1.19% nickel equivalent total grade. We're at 1.05%. We're right there, and I think catching up on them. Of course, we have a little under 12 million tons in that category, and they together have 17 here. As you see in subsequent slides, we've got a lot of room to connect these deposits across surface. And we think we can grow this very nicely. We're seeing continued challenges for Polymet and Teck in Minnesota. And just a couple of days ago, 20-year moratorium on mining for Antofagasta's twin metal projects in Minnesota. In fact, Antofagasta has had to give that a write-off now on their books, which is not something you like to do as a mining company. We are currently updating our peers and comparables decks. And as I mentioned, when it comes to active mining districts, this slide focuses on the US here. But in our base case scenario, Our 1.05 billion pounds of nickel is actually more than the past production and projected production at Eagle, and also everything Tamarack has to date. Even if you look at our 0.7% high grade threshold on a nickel equivalent basis, we're already rivaling these two. And of course, we've got that optionality on grades in between. We're well positioned to become a significant producer in the US of battery metals and precious metals, and we're nickel dominant. Take a look at Montana. This is a state that has been producing critical minerals for well over 100 years. It starts in 1850s with the gold rush, like so many areas, and that moves to copper during the World War I time frame. In fact, Montana was a dominant copper producer in the Western Hemisphere in that time frame. Copper production is still ongoing at the Continental Pit, other places, Black Butte, really good underground copper mine. Rio Tinto is partnered with the USGS looking at critical minerals in that area around Helen and Butte there in the Boulder Batholith. Ivanhoe, Rio Tinto, both partnered on major projects in the States. So this place is interesting to majors. We are in the lower part of the state there. We share the Stillwater Igneous Complex. It's something that you can see from space, and in fact, you can see our claim block from space. We share that district with Sibanye-Stillwater. Stillwater Complex itself was producing high-grade copper from our ground in the 1800s, early 1900s. In the 1940s, 50s, that shifts to high-grade chrome production. It's still the sole U.S. place for high-grade chrome in quantity. And starting in 1986, our neighbors' mines opened up, and they've been expanding ever since. We debuted our first resource in 2021, and we expanded that very nicely and brought that high-grade component in just a matter of days ago. Sibanye's production, over 500,000 ounces of palladium platinum, plus unreported amounts of copper, nickel, rhodium, gold, and silver. And they produced 750,000 ounces from their recycling operations as well. What we're bringing to the table here is economies of scale and a much greater battery metal component, as you'll see from our subsequent slides here. Look at the district. We share the Stillwater district with an $8 billion major, and that's a very rare position for a junior to be in. Our claim block is in yellow, four different blocks, Sibanye-Stillwater in gray. Together, we share the Stillwater complex. This is 40 kilometers by 8 kilometers on surface, highly prospective for all those commodities listed. It's over a century of production. It's a layered magmatic system, and it's very similar to the Bushveld, and that's a key point in today's webinar, is that layered nature. It's not a big homogeneous thing like some other magmatic complexes globally, and Danie will be speaking more to what that means in terms of the potential for grade and scale here. The district is dominated by the JM Reef deposit. It's 1.8 meters wide on average and 42 kilometers long. It spans your screen there as that purple line. It's dipping into your computer screen. We're seeing the edges of the magmatic layers here. They run 3 mines on that one deposit. The Blitz extension is still a work in progress and growing very nicely. And they run that smelter refinery complex off the screen. Typical of layered systems, and very much like the Bushveld, the layers are discrete in the upper portion in the greens, and that's where you see the JM Reef. We're just below that, and Danie will be speaking to this in subsequent slides. This is the correct setting for the Platte Reef style deposits, bigger magmatic events. This is where Anglo-Americans' Mahalaquena mine is located on the Bushveld, South Africa, and also Ivanhoe's Platte Reef mine, for example. Next slide, we'll take a close look in on the core part of the project, which is where all of our resources are to date, and we've modeled in detail with geophysics. In pink and blue, you've got very high level chargeability and conductivity anomalies. These were identified in ground-induced polarization surveys that we did in 2020, 2021. Some of the highest levels and largest responses ever seen by the contractor that did the survey, indicative of very large bodies of sulfide mineralization, and that's the key takeaway here. Our yellow deposit areas, as shown there, the 5 of them across that 9 kilometers, are set within those anomalies. giving us very positive indications of what these anomalies are made of and also the expansion potential from there. Obviously, this is 5 deposits that want to connect across the 9 kilometers and perhaps even the 12 kilometers as we reach out west here. If they look small, it's only because this is a 12-kilometer scale here. It's a very big system. The JM Reef deposit with its 100 million ounces total palladium platinum sits just up there. So there's a lot of metal in the magmas here. It was all created at the same time, and they're mining just about 2 kilometers down right there at Sibany's neighboring operations. At Crow Mountain, we've had some spectacular high-grade nickel hits. We've called out one here, 13.2 meters of 2.3% nickel as beautiful big grain pentlandite. Good copper, cobalt with that, plus 1.5 grams of 4E metals, being the 3 PGEs plus gold. And that's set within 400 meters of bulk tonnage grade mineralization. That's typical of what we see across this project, increasingly higher grade portions within broad mineralization. And that gives us that optionality on possible mine methods. Similarly, the CZ deposit, again, we see that broad package of 368 meters with higher grade within that. And again, at the HGR deposit. At this point, we've spanned over 7 kilometers. If you go to Crescent, that's 9. At this point, I think I'm going to hand off to Danie, and he's going to start a technical tour, which will include a very generic cross-section sliced approximately through there. And I think technical slides that will cover Chrome Mountain through to CZ and then HGR, being the areas that we've drilled to date, the 3 deposits that we've drilled ourselves. Take it away, Danie.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think as a geologist, and we don't get excited easily, but what we're seeing currently in the historic data and the work we've done recently is bringing some excitement to our team now, definitely. We're starting to connect these different deposits, filling the spaces in between, and I think that's quite important. So we, like I've said before, we focused on resolving the structural interpretation across these deposits and also the stratigraphic control on what we're seeing on the mineralization. So that's very important for us. I think let's go to the next slide, Mike. We can dive into that. Yeah, so this is a conceptual cross-section, a schematic section across Stillwater. The complex, it's a layered complex. It's one of the biggest in the world. I think it falls within the first 10 biggest layered complexes in the world, sitting at number 9, as far as I understand. And that's only the known part of Stillwater. There are geophysical anomalies that are hidden below some cover rock. So I think that's also important to know. But what we're doing on the low part of Stillwater, we've identified different types of mineralization settings, and these are normal for layered complex. These more stratiform JM, Marinsky Reef, UG2 type reef, high up in the layered sequence, close to that transition zone between ultramafic and mafic rock, where we generally have around 20% of differentiation in your magmatic system. And that's when you get sulfur saturation. So that area, and that's where Mike's point is now, is that upper part where the bronzitite, the peridotite zone comes in, just below the JM Reef. So those zones are quite important. We're seeing pegmatoidal rock there, very similar to Marinsky, also on the Platte Reef, where we see significant pegmatoidal rock that's mineralized. We're seeing large parts of this in that upper part, the hybrid, the Dunite Ridge, the DR and Tarantula types of styles of settings. And then also just on the JM Reef itself, that little squiggle that goes below the JM Reef is basically these ballroom pothole type structures that we're seeing. And these are verified by some geophysical anomalies onto our ground, where we hold the permits. So we're quite focused on those types of settings also. Lower down in the sequence, we're seeing these layered chromatite seams. We know there are PGEs associated with them, the AB chromatite. We're starting to understand and follow them across strike. The Stillwater complex is Archean complex, so it's old rock. There's quite a bit of structure involved, and we're busy unraveling that also. Albert Brits, our senior structural geologist, done significant work on that now in the last year. So that's quite important in these types of settings. We're seeing lower down the camp zone, nickel sulfide resource. These are more massive sulfide, net textured settings closer to the football contact. And we're seeing some control between Hornfels, Xenolith rafts in that zone where these sulfides appear to be trapped or just sitting in that position for some reason. So we're trying to understand what's going on in those settings. So the important thing is we're seeing several different styles of mineralization, reef type, flat reef style, contact style of mineralization, and we're also seeing cross-cutting, more structurally controlled and maybe also hydrothermal related mineralization styles. One of our big focuses, that bottom part of that sketch, the layer parallel pegmatoidal peroxide mineralized zones associated with chromatite. This is something new that we're looking at in that upper part of the peridotite, bronzotite zone. There's large areas underexplored on that, so we're also looking at that. We have some really good intersections on that. And some of the channel sample areas that we did late last year was also focused on that, and we had some very good results. Okay, Mike, next one. So this is, I'm trying to show you the more complex geological work that we are doing, and to understand on a project scale what the structure is doing, and all these later magmatic processes, synmagmatic, late stage hydrothermal processes, alteration processes. So we've put this diagram together. We're seeing post-emplacement chamber processes, low angle intrusion, fractionation of these rocks, chamber development, the subsidence of the chamber, layer and reef development as the magma crystallizes and differentiates, fold attenuation of the peridotite zone. So that's quite important. There are significant folding. There are two orientations of folding that we've identified up to now, and also these related dilational features within these fold structures. Basement faults, shear propagation associated with that, growth fault influence. As these magmas intrude, these growth faults seem to be synmagmatic and active during intrusion. And then across these different fault compartments, we see compartmentalization of the stratigraphy also, very similar to what we see, for example, in the eastern bushveld of South Africa. And then we'll obviously the base metal sulfides accumulate within trap sites towards the base of the peridotite zone. This is typical for contact style top deposits. The synmagmatic processes, structural control, as you can see on that central diagram, these volatiles come through and focused on the structures and intrude higher up through the layering. In most cases, the chromatite seams act as barriers or traps for these fluids. We see pegmatoidal overprint or modification of the regional rock type in these zones. And you can go as far as disruption of the chromatite seams and disrupting a part of the stratigraphy. Something we also saw on the flat reef of the flat reef in the northern bushveld. So these things are really something you need to understand and focus on. and then also redistribution, mobilization of PGs and base metal sulfides. Even if it's just over short distances, that's possible. And then what we've also, I'll show you a picture just later on. Next slide, layer parallel and cross-cutting pegmatoidal peroxenite coming through and cut across these layers. And then the Leighton magmatic processes, magnesium, iron, calcium-rich fluids, overprinting existing magmatic textures, extinctional reactivated structures. Reactivation of these archean structures is obvious much later geological stages. And then the very destructive or pervasive serpentinization process in late phases of these types of complexes. We saw a significant part of that again on the Platte Reef. So these sort of destroy the original textures in the rocks. And then preferential pegmatoidal chromatite bearing rock, layer parallel and cross-cutting intrusive olivine cumulates. This is something that we need to understand. We've got Professor Wolfgang Meyer working on that also for us. We really need to understand these large parts of these cross-cutting intrusive olivine rock types that overprint the existing magmatic textures. Next one, Mike. Yeah, so looking at Crow Mountain, you can see in the picture below there, and I can't point now myself, annotated part of the central part of that pegmatoid, the PTD and IOC, that's the olivine-bearing pegmatoidal rock that's coming cross-cutting through bronzitite cumulate, going across upwards, and then going layer parallel. We saw quite a bit of that in the field. So it shows you these fluids are late-stage cross-cutting fluids disrupting the original magmatic textures within these rocks. And if you look on the right, the top part, the cross-section, you can see these fluids coming through. The orange color, volatile, intrusive, the gray color, alteration fluids, ingress. These are later stage fluids focused on these structures within these fault structures and folded structures in the lower part of Stillwater. We are looking at the chromatites and the PG reefs associated with chrome stringers, and mostly then also associated with pegmatoidal peroxenite. And these are more layer parallel rocks that you can follow along strike. We're getting continuity on them, and we're seeing mineralization within these zones. There's a direct correlation with PGs and chromite across these layers, and these are obvious targets for exploration. The Danie Ridge target and also hybrid unit. So it looks like these different named targets from the past are actually possible to tie them up and show continuity across strike and with these units. So they are quite similar, mostly pegmatoidal rock associated with chromatite stringers. That's on Crow Mountain. Next one, Mike. So hybrid zone, focus more on the hybrid zone. You can see the top cross section there coming through from hybrid from the right-hand side. There's some control on the existing drilling that was done mostly in 2007. Coming across to the left-hand side where we've drilled in 2020, 21, CM 2021-6, CM 2021-1. Those different holes, CM 2021-05, sort of in the center there, where we've intersected some very good high grades. And these grades appear to be connected across this pegmatoidal zone. So these are all pegmatoidal olivine-bearing peroxenites in most cases. And we are looking at the continuity of these zones. In the plan view at the bottom there, you can see the fault structures on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the geophysical anomalies associated with these layers. So in most cases, we can follow these geophysical anomalies and put our drill holes and orientate them to intersect these zones. And they show significant mineralization. So geophysics, structural work, interpretation on the stratigraphy is guiding us in our interpretation and also in our planning for this year's exploration work that's going to come. Okay, next one. Yeah, so Crown Mountain again. What we're seeing is the Discovery Fault and what's called the New Animal Shear Zone in the central part there, inferred to be part of Precambrian age transcurrent fault systems. These are the faults are dominantly sinistral with north-northwest striking dextral faults having small displacements. Then we're seeing different two sets of fault systems, northeast trending faults, fault systems formed during the Transmontana deformation, probably with subsequent attenuation during the Big Sky orogeny. So what Alpe's done is he's gone into significant detail on the regional structural interpretations, and he's brought that back to the project scale and focused on the structure that we're seeing across these areas. So that's very important for us to understand in a regional setting and coming down into your project scale, what is going on, and fit all of that together. So these different fault orientations have been mapped out now and included into our models. And we can do our planning, like I said, for the new drilling for this year. The hybrid unit is original near a chrome-bearing pegmatoid. It's a bronzitite, part of the layered sequence. It's deformed by subsequent magmatic brecciation, and it's formed along that inner core of that northwest trending fold hinge. So I don't know, Mike, if you can point to the fold hinges. There's northwest trending and northeast trending fold hinges. So it's the grey lines basically in the diagram. Sorry, I don't have control on the pointer there. So yeah, that's quite important for us to understand the structure. We've also mapped these different chromatite seams, and I don't know, they are the black stippled lines on this plan. So you can see the folding, there's different orientation of folds across this area. It forms a type of an egg box type of structure of this folding. And it's really important to understand, like I said, what these structures are doing. Okay, next one. Cam zone, again, going into a lot of detail. We see sinistral movement on that fish scale and cam zone. Well, Alpe's named it the cam zone range corridor. It's a fish scale and cam zone west fault zone, and it forms a group of similar trending faults closely associated with the cam zone range corridor, which is that central hatched area. And we're seeing on the western side, the westerly zone bounding fault, it's an unknown fault, but of similar trend as the fish scale fault that you see on the diagram, on the plan. Truncates or tarantula pegmatoid with an apparent sinistral or left lateral oblique offset. And then the CWF position as the eastern bounding fault to the CWC shows distinct textural displacement of the fault sediments and ultramafic series. That's in the bottom part of that camp zone area. So what's important here is that the CWF has an apparent 1,500 meter textural offset of the camp zone geophysical anomalies, evident in various data sets, and that textual offset of up to 600 meters of the bronzitite zone gradually diminishes northwards into the middle banded series of the Stillwater complex. We're seeing that as these faults are active during emplacement of the magmas, and as the magmas differentiate and crystallize high up through the magma chamber, the effect of the faults diminishes in these magmatic rocks. The eastern margin of that CWF zone truncates the western end of the geophysical anomaly drilled at camp zone. So that's quite important. Depending on the timing of displacement, it may be possible then to find that westward continuation of the camp zone basal sulfide mineralization displaced up to 1,200 meters to the northwest. That's other hatched area, the CWC area further to the north there, within that hanging wall block of the CWF. So we're looking at that camp zone is quite important. It's more massive sulfide, net texture, nickel copper type of mineralization, a contact style type mineralization, which is one of the focus areas for us at the moment. If we can find additional areas for drilling, that type of mineralization is going to be quite important this year.
I might jump in there just to note that camp zone historically was advanced by AMAX a lot, and some of the metallurgy work that we'll summarize here in a subsequent slide was done by them there in 1973 on those sulfides. In our current lingo, we're calling that CZ now, but that's simply short for camp zone, just to help our listeners relate Danie's images here through to the deposit images. So I think you've probably got the lay of the land, but Chrome, of course, up there, and then CZ, and then Iron Mountain, HGR, and then Crescent, just to help tie these two images together.
Yeah, there's a lot of names to familiarize yourself with. We're still getting used to it. It's a large strike distance that we need to get used to. This is a huge area to work with.
It's a big project.
There's mineralization popping out all over the show. So I think the structural work and the interpretive work that we've done so far is we're in the process of really exciting stuff, unraveling what's going on and putting a lot more detail into the lower part of Stillwater, which is basically underexplored, understudied, under everything. So in my view, it's quite important.
And the foundational work we're doing here, which you're summarizing very nicely on structure and stratigraphy.
Yeah, I think the big thing to take away is that across a lot of these different deposit names across strike, we're actually seeing the same rock type. So these are mostly pegmatoidal peroxenites, some of them olivine bearing, and we are currently putting them together, and it looks like there's continuity across these folds and fold structures. So I think that's a big thing to take away from this, is that we're starting to put this thing together in much more detail, and the process of being able to follow these rock units, these mineralized layers across strike and down dip is going to be very important in future.
It's a fantastic land position and the right team for it too. And I look forward to getting back to Montana with you on that. Should we advance to the next slide?
Yep, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this just shows you a bit more detail on camp zone. We've modeled the Hornfels Zinulus in 3D in our leapfrog models. We're seeing significant nickel-rich sulfide mineralization, being it trapped or focused between these different Zinuluses. That's quite obvious. And also, there are significantly large associated geophysical anomalies with these zones. So some of them have been drilled, some have not. And like we showed in the previous slide, there's that whole area to the northwest, which hasn't been drilled. So if that connects up across that fault structure with camp zone, we're going to intersect massive sulfide type of mineralization again. And I think that's the important thing. We're seeing it in the resistivity and error EM and basically in all the data sets. So like I said, that's one of the targets for this year. Next one, Mike. Now again, on Iron Mountain, the HDR target, we're seeing a much broader type of mineralization, thicker zones of maybe I can say lower grade PGE and also nickel copper, but very similar again to camp zone. And again, we see the Hornfels floor rocks in a synclinal structure in 3D. There's some nickel-rich sulfide mineralization focused within these synclines. We saw that on the Platte Reef also in the shallow part of Platte Reef, where these sulfides are focused in structural traps, mostly in folded structures. And then also additional mineralization can occur within pot-like traps into the footwall, into the floor rock for some hundreds of meters. Large-scale associated geophysical anomalies, these are mostly underexplored. Yeah, like I said, we've been looking at investigating the continuity of camp zone into the eastern part and also across into the western and northern part across the fault structure. So again, these deposits seem to be tying up, and there's definitely continuity between them. Next one. Yeah, so I think one of the important takeaways from the work we've recently done is that we're seeing these different types of mineralization styles, more massive to net textured nickel copper sulfide, this camp zone type of mineralization located between sedimentary country rock Zinulus, and then proximal to the floor contact of the layered complex. And these are mostly nickel copper higher grade sulfides with low PGs associated with that. And that's different from the disseminated low sulfur PGE rich mineralization higher up in the sequence in the peridotite zone and possibly also into the bronzitite zone. We're looking at that contact between the peridotite zone and bronzitite zone. Bronzitite zone to me is a definite target if you compare it to, for example, the Great Dyke in Zimbabwe, where there's significant mineralization within that upper part of that peroxenite, which is sitting in a similar stratigraphic position as this bronzitite zone. We're seeing the same on the Platte Reef and also on the eastern limb of the bushveld, where there are very thickly developed peroxenite zones with associated mineralization. And mostly within these zones, these are more stratiform, thinner type, 1 to 5 meter thick pegmatol or peroxenites associated with chromatite stringers. That's something we're seeing recurring across Chrome Mountain, Iron Mountain, across those whole areas and in between them. The lateral extensive stratiform PG-rich chromatite seams in the peridotite zone, these are better developed chromatites like the AB chromatites. Similar to the lower part of the bushveld, the low critical zone, there are multiple chromatite seams developed. in the Crown Mountain, Iron Mountain area, and some of these, especially AB chromatites, are mineralized with PGEs mostly. And there's associated mineralization with that, and also with the peroxenites within that zone. So that's another mineralization style present. The high-grade PGE mineralization associated with the interval between the ultramafic and mafic portions of the intrusion, the James Reef. We do not have James Reef on our property, but we do see geophysical anomalies below the James Reef into Stillwater Critical Minerals permit areas where there's possible pegmatoidal layers within that upper part of the bronzitite zone. And that the possible interpretation is that these are ballroom type or pothole structures that we also see in the Merensky Reef here in South Africa that extend into the footwall bronzitite. And this can happen for hundreds of meters below the contact of these reefs. And these are well-known targets in the lower part of Stillwater, the Coors and Janet occurrences. But we do see large geophysical anomalies to the northwest of our Pine target. That's to sort of northwest of Iron Mountain. And then also just north of, Crown Mountain, then just north of Iron Mountain, within that range tectonic zone that I'll be indicated, where the Janet occurrence is also. We're seeing large geophysical anomalies there that are untested. So that makes us fairly excited to look at these areas also within our ground. Stratiform to pot and vein style sulfides in the upper portion of the intrusion. We held the ground across the Pickerpin deposit. It's significantly underexplored. We haven't done much work on it ourselves. So that's something for the future that we're looking at. What's mind-boggling is actually that within the land we hold is that you have these significantly different styles of mineralization and possibilities for exploration across these different types of deposits that we're looking at. Okay, Mike, next one.
I'll just add to that the Pine high-grade gold, which is yet another style. But that is drill defined and something that we're working towards a resource. That was the subject of a news release about 2 weeks ago, I think. Yet another one on the list here.
Yeah, I didn't want to include that.
Sorry.
No, we're seeing, I don't know if there's a slide on that actually. These northeast trending structures, these are shear zones. The high-grade nickel and gold, like Pine, but there are several different structures that are orientated in the same direction. So there's multiple opportunities to look at these different structures. These are hydrothermally mineralized zones within these shear zones. So it's late stage remobilization of these metals going and flooding through these structures, which is quite exciting actually.
Yeah. So the summary there is that it's big and well mineralized and remarkably underexplored.
Yeah, and to follow these big structures is not going to be difficult. We actually see them in the geophysics, in the LiDAR and everything that we're looking at. So they're definitely there and they're well developed.
Yeah. Metallurgical summary, always a factor always a concern with these nickel projects, and for good reason. Did you want to lead this one, Danie?
Yeah, you're the metallurgist, Mike. So
I used to own a lab. It's true.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a big project with a lot going on, a lot of mineralization, and a lot of exploration potential. So we have not looked in detail ourselves yet at metallurgy. We're more interested in in drilling 100-meter step outs and determining what we have in these variety of mineralization styles. It certainly looks like it wants to grow substantially. But metallurgy is important, and we've done a good effort to compile past work and even shine a light down the path, as this will become increasingly important as we grow the project. Initial testing has shown very encouraging results using conventional flotation techniques, noting that this is an exploration stage asset. Nickel and copper sulfide flotation, along with recovery of significant PGE component, appears entirely reasonable. Heavy mineral concentration techniques have also been very effective in historic work. We've brought to that petrographic work done by the US Geological Survey, starting to look at thin sections and such, and we're seeing the coarse-grained pentlandite that is what people want to see. This is not only nickel sulfide, but it's coarse-grained and probably very recoverable in the sense that the sulfide particles are big, and it's also not in silicate, which is a key point. And this is why we are, well, actually there's a bullet here in a second that I'll get to on that. AMAX did excellent work in initial bench scale testing. This is at the Camp Zone or CZ deposit area in the 1973, I believe. Single stage flotation tests, but they reported good recoveries. And we're seeing what looks like a saleable nickel copper con with good recoveries of PGEs, including rhodium. And that's very encouraging, and that's something that we'll be following up on. We are paying a lot of attention to nickel tenors, and that's something that distinguishes us from a lot of the other bigger nickel projects out there. Basically, the big mining companies like to see a certain degree of, a certain nickel tenor to the sulfides, put it that way. They want to see the nickel in sulfide and not in silicate, and there are, of course, some elaborate calculations to determine that. There's also an easy back of the envelope method that we've been applying, and we're getting these 2 to over 7% nickel in sulfide results from that. You see us report sulfur in our resource update just 6 days ago. These are returning very good nickel tenors of 2.5% up to over 7. And that speaks to really good nickel recovery as sulfide. Some of the other projects out there, very low in sulfur, a lot of nickel in silicate, and recoveries, you see it in their metallurgical testing, goes down accordingly. It's not a problem if you're prepared to mill a lot and leave a lot of nickel in your tails, but it is a factor in your economics. It's worth noting that Sibanye, our neighbor, despite being known for their wealth of palladium and platinum, is actually a nickel copper sulfide reef deposit. And the 2 mills that they run just north of us are in fact conventional, basically flotation mills producing a con that they then upgrade in Columbus and ship on from there for further recovery. So there's good indications of positive recoveries broadly in the magmas that made the district. And Danie doesn't like it when I mention this, but there's lots of free gold at Pine, and that suggests very good metallurgical recoveries there. Looking more broadly across the system, our entire presentation today has focused within that 12-kilometer core area, as you saw modeled in 3D by induced polarization. Danie took you on an excellent tour, starting at Chrome there, touching on CZ, Camp Zone, and then HGR. These are the 3 areas we've drilled ourselves. We have not yet drilled Central and Crescent. We have good data to build those models on. More broadly across the 25 and even 32-kilometer span of the project, when you include the East Target area, it all looks to be the same lower Stillwater complex, highly prospective, just earlier stage. This is a conductivity map. The purple areas are highly conductive, and in each case, we see really good targets, never drilled, expansion potential beside the known deposits. There's the Pine target with the high-grade gold, and as Danie mentioned, that's part of a shear structure that's cutting north-south there. Similarly, in soils, and I promise this is the last technical slide, very high-level metals in soils, very largely untested. There's 230 total drill holes now across the 62-kilometer square package. We've now brought I'm actually forgetting my numbers, 156, I believe, of those are now in the current models. We've got a further 74 holes to guide us in our expansion effort. Some of those are in this gap here between the deposit areas, and you'll see us work increasingly on that. Some of these soil anomalies never tested by drill, maps the peridotite zone beautifully. It all speaks to a highly prospective and metal-rich district. Touch very quickly on our two other district scale assets before we get to questions and answers. This is the high-grade gold project in Ontario. It adjoins Treasury Metals Goliath Gold Complex. We built this starting in 2012. We announced last year a deal with Heritage Mining, a new listing. This is their flagship. They're doing great work. We've already got, we're 12% of their company in share issuances. I believe it's 2.9 million shares issued under this 7.2 million shares total to date. And they've paid us about half of the cash that's coming, the 320. They're obliged to spend $5 million on exploration, and we have a $10 million grant, discovery bonus program in place based on their success. That's appropriate for the district, given the more than 10 million ounces proven up in that district to date. Very glad for that exposure to the gold space and looking forward to further work by them this year. In the Kluane, we have the Kluane PGE-Ni-Cu-Co Copper project. This is increasingly of interest given the Canadian government's push on critical minerals, very much like the US and their initiatives, for much earlier stage ground. It adjoins the Wellgreen deposit, and you'll be hearing more about us, or from us, on this one in the coming months. We have some small programs in mind, and we've got Danie's expertise now on the ultramafics here, the magmatic system here as well. Stillwater, of course, always the flagship, but this is of interest and this is relevant to the current appetite, and you'll see us move this along and advance some targets with a view ultimately to a sale in the same manner as we did with Heritage in Ontario. We made the Stillwater acquisition in 2017. We were basically the right people at the right time, and it's been fantastic ever since. A lot of data compilation in the early days, in addition to tripling the land position the more we got into the data. 2019 we drilled it, 2020 we drilled it, and we did the first IP survey. That brought us fantastic ability to target, and we delivered our first resource 2021, drilled it again, expanded the IP survey again, and in 2022 added Danie and Albie to the team to complete that Platte Reef expertise. Brought that Platte Reef expertise and the 2021 drill campaign into the expanded resource, and that was one of our first catalysts for this year. Up next, 2022 exploration results, further news on our government grant updates, and that includes carbon sequestration, also metallurgy. We're looking at some hydrometallurgical systems that also include carbon sequestration under DOE grant funding. Announcement of our 2023 field programs is coming, and we anticipate these will be the biggest to date. Heritage Mining will have updates on their continued work and payments at Black Lake and the Kluane project as well. Our share price is in the process of recovering nicely. Like many companies, we went down with markets, with our peers. Through last year, it was brutal, frankly, the flight to the US dollar and the risk off mentality. It created some terrific buying opportunities through the October-December timeframe, and I was certainly one of them buying the stock if you look at the insider reports. We're up nicely now, and we think this is just the beginning with the new resource out and the marketing push that we're doing around that. Danie and I are off to one-to-one in Indaba in Cape Town together next week. I've got a series of meetings in Montana after that, and the DOE production in Austin, Texas as well. That's us getting the word out. We have visibility to over 5 million in cash right now, about 3 million cash and cash equivalents, and then 2.3 million of in-the-money warrants and options. Concerning our plans for the year ahead, we do not need to raise money currently at these prices. We want to keep the news flow up, keep the marketing efforts up. We have a number of very good conversations underway with potential major partners on the project and some funds as well. And we want to see where those lead before we do anything. So in the short term, it's road shows and promotional. Thanks to yesterday's close above 25 cents, we have $1.3 million of warrants in the money. And at 30 cents, we have $6.6 million of warrants in the money. So there's between those two tranches, 8 million available to us by this summer at a modest share price increase. There's a further tranche of $4 million at 55 cents. So our objective basically this year is to bring those in, driven by ideally a good partner, and to drive our largest programs yet site. We're very excited about the expansion potential here. We feel that we are emerging without peer in North America for scale and grade in an active district for critical minerals, especially nickel, cobalt, and the PGEs. And we're very much looking forward to continuing our work from site. I think that unless you've got any further comments, Danie, that concludes the more promotional or more technical side of the presentation. We'd be glad to go to any questions.
Thanks, gentlemen. I think that was one of the most comprehensive and certainly technical updates that we've given. I think that was an excellent overview and opportunity to hear from Danie on what he's seeing there as our Vice President of Exploration. We have gone long. There are a couple of questions that we'll just quickly run through, and then I would encourage everyone or invite you certainly to reach out to Mike or myself, or we can put you in touch with Danie if it's very high level. Mike, rough calculations on average tonnage value. Has there been any back of the envelopes on that? I know we have an in situ ballpark, but
well, in a gross metal basis, we're over 20 billion US dollars, 27 billion Canadian, and we're sitting with a 45 million market cap. So in that very crude analysis, we're being recognized for a tiny fraction of our value in the ground. Of course, it's an inferred resource, and you can't assume all of that would crystallize. But the whole junior sector is beaten down, and I think we're one of very few that offer the kind of upside that we're talking about here, and expansion potential.
Yeah, and I would just echo your earlier sentiments. I think when tax loss selling dried up, you could almost draw a bright line for that pressure abated somewhat. And we've seen a nice move off that bottom and a kind of a nice structure to the chart as we kind of close in on that 27 area. There is a question, I know that you skipped over it a little bit, but the pine target, and you can probably see that question there. It's actually a better hit than that, but maybe just a little bit about pine and the potential there. Is it maybe a standalone?
Sure. Well, you've seen that we have 5 deposits across 9 kilometers that want to connect. We were not able to include pine in that in either of our resources to date. We didn't feel we understood the geology well enough, and did good work last year on the ground. Danie can maybe summarize better than me, but we peeled back the outcrop, we peeled away some talus, we had a look at the structure. We're getting our bearings there now, and that's the kind of work you have to do before you can deliver a resource. So there is drill-defined mineralization there. I won't, in this public setting, quote the internal numbers, but it would actually be a healthy addition, and it's running about 8 grams per ton gold in the current back of the envelope model. So it's a nice grade, brings good nickel and palladium, and that's the kind of low-hanging fruit here that we have here at Stillwater. We're looking to bring that on the table this year as a formal resource. I won't promise that quite yet, but we feel now that we understand it much better, and are lining up well to deliver that. Is that a good summary, Danie?
Yeah, we've done some field work there last year, so we understand the structure a lot better, the orientation, the thickness of the structure, everything. So there's a lot of possibility there. The historic intersections are significant, as Mike has alluded to. It's definitely something we're going to look at. It's high in gold and nickel, which is quite interesting. So it's obviously hydrothermal in origin. and it's a fairly wide structure. So, like I've said previously, there are similar orientated structures also in that area. So it's something exciting to look at, especially if you look at the historic grades that come from it. We did a channel sample across it. I don't think we're allowed to talk about that. So we got some very good results from that.
Disclose. Yeah, there's just one last question, but I think that's.
I think those channel samples were disclosed in a news release 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. The one question, I mean, we just kind of spent the last hour going through this, talking some of the Platreef comps. So the question is, how does your Platreef, your project, I guess, compare with South Africa's Platreef? And I think we don't really have another whole hour to go through that whole thing, but yeah, maybe just a quick recap on why we refer to Platreef analog.
Should I maybe start that, Danie, and then you finish it? So we use the term Platreef based on location and parallels. If you look up Stillwater and Bushveld complexes even on Wikipedia, the parallels are well known. And the JM Reef at Stillwater was found directly by following the Merensky parallels over from Bushveld. When America needed platinum in the 1970s, that became the current mines. Below that is the Platreef setting. And this is where bigger magmatic events have come in and created these bigger mineralized bodies and that bulk mining model. When I say Platreef, it causes Danie's eye to twitch a bit because he understands much better the finer points within that, and that there are several mineralization styles going on. And that was well summarized in that earlier slide, that really there you could bin it in sort of 5 categories here. To tie it back to Ivanhoe's operation, their entire Platreef mine would fit within one of those blue ovals that we presented of the 8 that we have across our project. So the beautiful thing here is that thanks to the 1872 mining laws that are still in place in the US and the vagaries, how hard it is to find out who holds what, and thanks to Justin Madru, we were able to come in and stake that entire lower Stillwater complex at a time when no one was looking. It was 2017. With that, we've effectively tied up what Anglo has and what Ivanhoe has, and even Platinum Group Metals' Waterbird project. That whole span, and to our surprise, it's remarkably underexplored. And the USGS was always keen to have a partner there. We're glad to be that partner. Now we've even got government funding behind us and behind them. So it's only gotten better for us there. The potential just gets hyperbolic and very forward-looking. So at that point, I'll hand it to Danie to actually say what Platreef is.
Well, look, there's significant similarities in the mineralization styles that we're seeing. These types of deposits, the way we understand the Platreef is that it's where the layered complex comes into contact, directly into contact with footwall sediments, mostly highly reactive sediments such as dolomite. And that's something that we're seeing in the lower part of Stillwater, where there's significant assimilation and also of these footwall sedimentary lithologies. So that's a big thing that creates these large sort of lower grade, very thick deposits. We're assimilating footwall sediment and bringing in additional sulfur into the magma and creating stages of sulfur saturation, multiple stages of sulfur saturation within these lower parts of these intrusions. You need sulfur saturation in these magmas to extract the metals from the magma itself, because the metal goes preferentially into the sulfide and not into the silicon. So it's basically exactly what we're seeing on Platreef. The higher grade upper part of the Platreef is somewhat different. and we've correlated that with the Merensky Reef. So that's a whole different ball game. On the James Reef, that's why we focused on that, because we're seeing multiple areas of where the geophysical anomalies extend from our ground upwards through the stratigraphy into the James Reef areas. And that's why these pegmatoidal zones are huge targets for us. I've been hammering on pegmatoidal rock since I started working for this company. And that's where we see the high grade. So especially where the pegmatoids are associated with chromatite. So these rocks, there's a big correlation between chromatite within these rocks and PGEs, and also nickel copper. So we get very high grade PGEs, you're also going to get a fairly significant contribution from your base metals. It's not just at the base of these intrusions where you can get significant nickel copper, but also in the more stratiform high grade reefs. Like on the Platte Reef, the upper part, there's significant contributions from nickel copper. That Mogalakwena mine of Anglo is actually a nickel mine, if you really think about it. I think the nickel contribution is about 45% to value of that deposit. So we're seeing very similar stuff. We're seeing the same rock types. We're seeing the same type of alteration, styles of metasomatic overprint in these rocks in Stillwater. It looks like you're walking in the same type of geology the whole time. The one big difference is Stillwater is Archean deposit. It's a couple of 100 million years older than Bushveld. There's more structure associated, although the Bushveld itself has got its own significant amount of structure. So these are Proterozoic Archean types of deposits, but that's the type of deposits within in these old cratons that actually carry these types of magmatic sulfide deposits. And there's a couple of them in the world, but there's the big ones are the important ones. And Stillwater is definitely one of them. There's no question about it. The fact that Sibanye is operating those different mines within that area is telltale for something like this. We're in elephant country, and like Mike said, we're sitting with kilometers of strike that we need to look at. The big thing is to focus and drill out these high grade zones, in my view, and I would like to get to, and he's probably going to say something, but I would like to get to an indicated resource sooner than later.
That's actually almost a perfect segue and answered a little bit of the last question that we have here, which is to Danie. What is the most cost-effective way of drilling off such a large land package? And you touched on it a little bit just now, but maybe just round that out a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So my focus now would be to delineate these high-grade zones of PGE-Ni-Cu-Co mineralization, establish continuity on them, do infill drilling, and move forward towards indicated category for specific areas. Obviously, there's a lot of additional expansion drilling that you can do, but how much more inferred resource do you want to add to the inventory? This year, I would focus on looking at getting closer towards an indicated resource, in my view. So we're working with our resource guys to understand what we need to do to get into that position for 2023.
Yeah, I think everybody would like to see a nice big program for us this year, and I know that we're all looking forward to getting that on the go. Yeah, I think it's the year is shaping up in the markets, and the time is right for nickel in our project. With is generating a fair bit of buzz just within the mining community, but also within the U.S. kind of policy making universe as well. So we'll keep moving that forward. Danie, I know it's nighttime now for you, so really want to thank you for that, for joining us and that really comprehensive, excellent technical overview. We can let you go, and we can let everybody else go with thanks for sticking it out. And again, reach out to Mike, myself, or Danie. And guys, I know you're connecting in Cape Town in a few days, so safe travels to you both, and look forward to hearing about that very busy schedule.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, bro.